that I talk about is hybrid architectures, but when I started thinking about it, I realized I really didn't know what that meant. So part of the purpose for this talk today is to help, I guess, think out loud what hybrid architectures might mean. And I think I'd be interested in your opinions as well. In fact, I better get some idea because I'll be teaching a course on it next semester. So I've been collecting. Does this modulate down here, Frank? Is there a dial here for volume gain? Okay. So I've been thinking about hybrid architectures for a while. I've been collecting various pictures of contemporary architectures. How many of you have looked or studied even architecture? And you just design magazines and things like that? Okay. So you might know that there are some contemporary trends in architecture right now where people are trying to fuse digital technologies with architecture, with bricks, looking at electronic techniques, or information technologies, database technologies, surveillance technologies, and put them into buildings. So there's one movement which is called smart architecture. I'm not talking about that. So I'm not interested in making buildings proof against mad bombers and things like that. Okay? I'm interested in spaces which are somehow made more livable or more inhabitable by the embedding of different kinds of digital augmentation, whether it's with video, with digital sound, music, things like that. And you see at the very end some small experiments at Sponge that we've been doing with that goal in mind. Okay? So the questions I would like to have us all in mind, at least for the next 45 minutes or so, or 50 minutes, is what does hybrid mean? So what does it mean when you say you're hybridizing between X and Y? And the next question is, of course, what's architecture? What are the limits of architecture? Is it just these walls here, the stairs, where the restrooms are kept? There are certainly conventions like that. But another question might be like the architecture, the social architecture of a building. Who's walking in, who lives there, who is a transient, who is allowed access to a building, things like that. Or how do you learn a space when you walk into a space? So when you start making the space more active, when you start putting in computer-guided cameras are looking at you that in turn do inferences on who it thinks you are and what it thinks you want to do, and then modifies the way the doors open, for example, or modifies the sound space around you, then how would you learn the space? Okay, it's not just the system is learning about you, you need to learn about the space as well. There are certainly antecedents to this, many antecedents, and one of them was that it's always helpful, I think, to go back into antecedent technologies, like the technologies or the architectures in this case from the Renaissance. In this case, slightly just before the Renaissance. In Italy, how many of you have actually had the chance to travel to some ancient architectures? Ancient being different senses, like Southwest or Mexico. But how many of you have been to Italy to look at the or Italy or France or okay? So there's this. There's some amazing palaces that have been built. And this one, I think, is one of the most remarkable from the point of view of interior design. It's called the Palazzo Te in Mantova. It's a small medieval town. And when you walk into this one room, it's called the Room of the Giants, the Sala dei Giganti. It's just extraordinary, because when you look up around you, the walls are all painted with this amazing scene from the Battle of the Gods between the gods and the giants. And this mythical battle, this titanic battle, in fact, with titans, is painted in such a way that you don't see the walls anymore, because it's painted so it's curvilinear. The scene is curvilinear. You don't see the corners. Right? Here's the corner. You can see the corner here. But thanks, Judith, when you look up, it turns into a curved dome. But there's no curved dome. Not at this point. It's still a corner. Okay, so this is virtual reality, 15th century virtual reality. And it's done remarkably well, better, I think, than most of the things you can get from Disney these days. Okay, well, one of the reasons why it works so wonderfully is because it's backed by, let's say, a few thousand years of mythology. It's very powerful to look up into this scene, look above your head in the Sala dei Giganti, and see this. You see the gods tossing down the enemies onto your head. You see them throwing thunderbolts down. You can hear their chariots grinding against the clouds, because you read about this, right? So this is also a fusion because in some of these examples, there are real cupolas. This is painted. So the dome is a virtual dome. It's painted around, in some cases, around a real circle, a disk that's open to the real sky. So you have this fusion between the real built space and the mythological space here. So there are many examples like this from architecture that would be very interesting to look at. So when we look at modern architecture books, it would be also interesting to look for, let's say, VR or hybrid realities from older periods. So I'm going to talk about different kinds of, or just to, not even talk about so much, but just to point out what I think of as different kinds of hybridizations, different kinds of fusions. And I'll start with a kind of fusion, which I would call montage, let's say, which is a fusion of stuff. Ontology being the science of what exists, what's actually out there, what's the stuff that we're working with. And some of the examples I'm drawing from come from the recent from the recent Biennale of Architecture in Venice. So I'm giving you things hot off the press, in a sense, or hot off the buildings. And in the most recent Venice Biennale for architecture, the theme was the city of the third millennium. So what is the city going to be like in the next 1,000 years? It was a very nice open theme, small, modest theme. I think Cornubert was one of the architects featured in this exhibit. And I think of his examples as a kind of an ontological fusion. I'll show you what that means in the next picture. So it's a montage. He submitted a sequence of images. If you can see down here, can you make out what's, okay, so here are skyscrapers, right? Can you make out what's down there? It's sort of blurry. Anyone make out what's, yeah, suburbs. Well, it's little houses, right? Little houses and little streets. And here it's just blobs, but anyway, in the original it's more clear. So you just take suburbs and cut and paste and put them inside the building. So this is a montage. This is yet another example of montage. It's a very provocative one. It's an example of a technique that goes back obviously to the beginning of the 20th century. And this I would call kind of an ontological fusion where everything's at the same level. So pictures of buildings from one domain cut against pictures of buildings in another domain. Okay, it's a very simple kind of montage, but you can have other kinds of montage. For example, you can just take a still life. Right? A still life is another example. You just have different fruit on the table. Whether it's an image of the fruit or whether it's the real fruit itself, it's still fusing stuff in the same regime. All fruit, or in this case, all bricks. It's an ontological fusion. Okay. Now, I said this is a technique of modernism or postmodernism because one of the hallmarks of that is basically this kind of cutting and pasting of different styles putting together. So this fits in this kind of first version of hybridity, I would say. It's okay. Okay, it's interesting, but we can do much better than this. Another kind, which you've probably all read about already, is bricks plus bits. Okay, this is the usual connection. Goes back to like Benedict's book, right, on City of Bits. And the idea here is to take metaphors from information science, from computer systems, and reify them or embed them somehow into the built space. Okay. And one way to look at it, I would say, is I think this is, in a sense, a natural effect when people start to discover some new media. This is what McLuhan wrote about when he's saying that any new medium, right, often what you find in a new medium is basically recapitulation of some forms from the old medium. Like when you start going to, when you go to film, at the beginning, people started to first stage works and just put the camera in front of the stage and just treat it as like moving pictures of a theater piece. But that didn't last very long. So I think of this kind of embedding basically as the first natural result when people start discovering computer systems. Denari is a very interesting example of such an architect. He's in the sci-art. This is really unfair to him because he's got a huge amount of many ideas which are far beyond just a simple embedding of IT. But he's in charge of the SciArc, the school for Southern California School for Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles, and it's worth looking at, I think, at some of his writings and his work. This is one example of his projects from, I guess, 1993. And the problem was there was a design studio. There was one space, one big, like loft space. And they needed to cut it in two. And they had people doing different kinds of functions. I don't remember what they were. So people, one half of the space was supposed to do what maybe, I don't know, sorting and collecting stuff, and people on the other side maybe were supposed to do data collection or data analysis, who knows. And instead of just building a simple wall, cutting that space up, he built a very complicated corrugated structure, this big yellow blobby thing. And he built these steps, and you had to walk up into this thing that looked like a trailer, but made of this odd, plasticky, blobby wall. And inside this corrugated space, there was kind of a transitional space. And you could sit down actually at some work tables and then walk out the other side. So that was his wall. His wall was in cross-section, in fact. This is the so-called wall in cross-section. It's actually hollow, right? And the way he thought about it is, this is very characteristic of Denari at that time. In fact, there's a book that he wrote called Gyroscopic City about New York, which might be interesting to look at. He was thinking not so much in terms of real physical fleshy bodies walking through the space. Yes, of course, he was doing that too. But he was also thinking in terms of the information stream, the stream of data. And even more, he was thinking in terms of functional streams, streams of functionality that flow through the space. So to be concrete, I'm just dreaming this up now, but suppose you walk from one space to the other space. In one space, you're a sorter and collector of things, of objects. You have to put things in bins, for example. And then when you walk to the space, go to the other side, you change your role. You're now somebody who's looking at maybe the cost, doing some sort of accounting stuff. Okay? So when you go from one space to the other space, your role, your function is changing. Okay? So it seems like what he was thinking about is, well, maybe we should provide some sort of ambient, some sort of transitional space in between for people to sort of decompress and recompress, or dematerialize and rematerialize their functions as they walk across. And this is a very simple example. He's thought of, for example, all of New York City like this, where there are huge, massive nets and flows of information, but not just raw information, but structured information. Different kinds of activities, different kinds of functions, different kinds of responsibilities are tied with these data flows. So he thought of New York City and other cities as these multiple overlapping systems, which he wanted his architecture to somehow register. Okay. But my view on this is, again, it's a very, well, literal is always a hard word to use, but it's a very literal embedding of ideas from computer science and information technology. Okay. That's my claim. Here's another example, which is actually quite beautiful, I think. It's by a friend, an acquaintance named Olivier Albert, and his architectural firm in France. It's a French-German architecture firm. And they've done an extraordinary number of projects in Europe. This is just one of the medium-sized ones that they've done. And what Olivier has done is he was commissioned, or his firm was commissioned to take the legend of the ring, Das Nibelungenlied, and try to do something with that in the hometown of Worms. So this city in the myth is of central importance, and the real city wants to somehow tie into that myth. Try to tie the real city, tie itself to the mythological city somehow. So this project is not completely virtual. There's an actual fortress. I haven't been there, so I'm just basing it on what he told me. There's an actual fortress. There's an actual set of walls, and they're not all complete. So what he has offered to do with his firm is to literally just jam digital projections against the real buildings. So he's going to partly build the real buildings, and then he'll fill in with projections, some places with video projections. So I think it's pretty interesting. These towers, I don't know if they're there now, but or they had to be reconstructed. This is a seeing tower. This is a listening tower. So when you walk down these stairs, it's like a square spiral. Go down, 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 down to the depths below the fortress. You go through these various exhibits, and they'll be projecting various images on you. Okay. What's most interesting is what's underneath Schatz. I don't know German enough, so does anyone know what Schatz means? I'm sorry, I didn't look it up, but here's what's underneath. When you see that up there in the sky, that is the surface of the ground. That's what you were walking above. When you descend into the earth, you actually go down some stairs. You're also descending into a virtual space, I mean a projected space. And he and his colleagues have developed an amazing computer system which does real-time synthesis of many, many objects, keeping track of them as if they were a particle system, interacting particle system. And he can project onto these particles media, like tiny little video clips or images. He can position sounds in the virtual space, etc., right? And you're walking into code. You walk from the real soil, you go down some stairs, you see projections, and basically you walk into code. So that's the metaphor that he's using to design his project. And this looks like it's, actually to me this looks like a piece of code from Max, the MIDI programming system, which is used for real-time control of music and image. And in fact, this is a foretaste of what I'll be showing you with Sponge, because we're using that system as well. And the idea here, he showed me some videos which they've already produced. If you walk down through this space, you see around you, in the air, the physical air around you, these projections, and it seems as if that these particles of media, which is coming out from a well at the bottom of the world, it's a bit obvious, like there will be some obvious resonances to the tree of knowledge, yes, Yggdrasil, and these particles of video, they look like specks from a distance, you'll know they're video, are come tumbling out, and they're shards. When they come through the ring, they look like shards of glass. And you can actually walk around as if you're flying in space. And the shards of mirrors, turns out that they're not actually video, they don't carry video on them. They're actually reflecting some images. And where are the images coming from? They're coming from a huge virtual sphere, which you cannot actually touch or even see directly, which is set out somewhere way far out, beyond the walls of that space, onto which is composited a set of videos. It's on the virtual sphere. You can only see what those little flecks of glass reflect. So as they tumble, they reflect different parts of the sphere into your eye. It's a beautiful, beautiful image. Beautiful, absolutely. But this is still embedding, I would say, just embedding some sort of digital representation into space. In this case, the digital representation happens to be a remarkable one. It's a 3D world. You can never have, in fact, you can't even have that in the real world. Here's another set of examples of a different kind of hybridization. And I would call this, using a larger term, phenomenological hybridization. And what I mean by that is these kinds of architectural projects try to investigate not just the thing out there, whether it's made of bricks or whether it's made of bits, but your relation to that object. Okay. So the whole complex is the person or the entity that's making the observations, and the relation between this entity that's making observations and the thing that it thinks it's observing. All right, so I'm trying to investigate this whole relation, not just viewer and object anymore. That relation is a much more subtle issue. The examples I have from this come from a beautiful book which I brought with me. If some of you would like to look at it, I think I would gladly share it with you, which is called, how would you pronounce it properly? Le temps précaire, precarious time. And I think of this book as a wonderful, how do you say, antidote or balance to the usual architectural pictures that you see in all the design magazines. Mainly because it's very playful. And the projects are very precarious. They really are. Here's an example. This is a project done by the architects I showed earlier, Roche, etc., et al. And they just bicycle along and carry this curvy mirror. and they just bicycle through the streets, and that's their experiment. Because by moving a curvy mirror through the streets, they deform your vision of your own city. What's beautiful about this project, right, is they don't have to expend any capital like Hundertwasser in making the actual curvy walls of real buildings. They just deform your vision this way. And they can deform anything that they pass. Yeah? It's a beautiful phenomenological experiment. And it's very elegant. It's very playful. They were inspired, by the way, by looking at these Airstream buses, these campers that you pull along, you drag along behind you, which have these bread box curvy shape. Right, that was their starting point. Another kind of phenomenological experiment is actually I would say a much deeper kind of phenomenological experiment is being done or has been done for the last 30 years by Madeline Gins and Arakawa. They live in New York City, and they've been working for quite a long time in all sorts of media, not just, let's say, art architecture, but also making installations, boxes, and things like that, paintings. And they have a notion they call perceptual landing sites, which builds on what you saw earlier. And I'll just show you a few pictures from them. Very early work that they did, which is actually quite amusing, again, talking about the relationship between you and the view, is what they call a gaze brace. It's just to brace your gaze. So the idea is there's a lot of interest in how people direct their vision, their attention to a space around them. So they said, okay, why don't we reify? Why don't we make very explicit an architectural support for your vision? So it's a pun, okay? Then, of course, they have done very large-scale works. It's not just one-off ideas. Here on the right-hand side is a typical example of their interior architecture. They have these curvy walls, which are brightly colored, and they cut right through the middle of your space. They will cut right through the bathtub, they cut right through the kitchen table, they cut right through the closets. And this is a cutout section, which is fairly easy to see. But what's remarkable about that kind of experiment, this is an architectural phenomenological experiment, is that it forces you, or forces the inhabitant, the person who tries to live in such a space, to re-examine very carefully what it is that makes a room. On the left-hand side is, I think, one of my favorite works by these people. It's a garden done in Japan. Those Japanese gardens. They're very elegant, they're very beautiful and peaceful, and they're very extremely carefully, meticulously laid out by raking the sand with stones. What Arakawa and Gins did was to take such a garden and wrap it into a cylinder, a giant, giant cylinder. When you walk into it, it is your entire world. It surrounds you. The horizon is the garden, the sky is the horizon. Overhead is the garden. It's a giant cylinder. So it completely destroys your sense of gravity. So there are benches up above you, see? And there's giant boulders hanging over the side. So they have this notion of what they call perceptual landing sites, and they have a very serious intent under that, which is trying somehow to make the world, what I would call, to make the world strange to you again, so you can rediscover somehow the marvelous aspects of the world, whether it's built or so-called natural. And this way of making strange the world is something which is deeply in the phenomenological tradition. It's also something that we're trying to do in our playful way with Tea Garden, which I'll get to at the end. And they have this notion of perceptual landing sites, meaning your perceptions, after your perception has been dislodged, it will have to come to rest again at various moments or various places. And they very carefully study how your perception comes to rest. And it doesn't have to be in a physical location. It can be kind of a mental resting site as you wander around such spaces. I'm sorry, I'm just going through these a little fast because there's a lot to each of these examples, more than just what I'm saying here. So, ontological fusion. So I should say that there are other kinds of ontological fusions which might be, in a sense, deeper fusions than just the montage technique that I started with at the beginning. And just to give us a little taste, we can start off with this playful example where we're taking trees. These people took trees, and just by cutting them in certain ways and painting them in certain ways, they turned the trees into figures. So it's kind of ontological fusion. These are the natural objects or living objects which now become inhabitants themselves in the built space, and in fact become a dance troupe. That's how they were staged. That's very pretty. Another example is also from the Béton Précaire, from the set of experiments there, is just this. You just fill the sky with flowers. And if you look up, you see it like this. Sponge started about 3 years ago out of a seminar that I ran at Stanford called the Interaction Media Group. It was a workshop, not a really more workshop than a seminar. In other words, we actually sat around the table and we talked with each other instead of just doing this, just coming to a lecture. Somebody comes in and gives a talk and leaves, and you leave. We actually spent week after week after week trying to understand each other's language about how we each understood interaction, how we each understood computer-generated media, how we understood computation. And I was the only mathematician. Most of the people came from literature, from drama, from theater, from music. Maybe there was one other computer science. There's one computer science person. So it was really very hard work trying to first understand each other. And the way I ran the workshop, or at least the way I encouraged workshop people to participate, was to give each other the principle of charity. That is, I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't understand a word of what you're saying. So I'll come back next week. So I think you have something to say. And over the course of 3 years, we were able to construct a kind of a working understanding of each other. It was even articulated. But what Chris Salter and Lara Faribault challenged me to do was to say, well, let's not just talk about it anymore, not just read the usual suspects, Wittgenstein and Derrida, etc., but also make some tangible experiments in the world that we can actually think of as material forms of our conversation. So that's how Sponge started. So we built a couple of, now 3, public experiments. I'll show you, Judith, how much time do I have at this point?
20 minutes.
Okay, so I'll show you 2 videos.
Practice transfer of information.
And in fact, maybe I'll have time to take questions then. The first one, or the second one rather, we did as part of the San Francisco Electronic Music Festival. And let's see, should I play it or talk about it? Did I just play it? Okay, I didn't just play it. Well, I'll see if I can narrate a little bit. One of the ideas for the sauna was the following. We walk around in space, the built space, and it's not just engineered with buildings, it's also engineered with icons. There could be visual icons, it could be oral icons. So there could be the Nike logo, for example. As soon as you look at that little whisk, you think, Nike, right? So we're wired for this now. So we're bombarded with these icons, with these jingles, with, in fact, what I call speaking in macros. We also even speak sometimes automatically. You say, hi, how's the weather? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And actually, it's particularly true for people here, for us here. And Europeans who come over remarked on this. They say, well, you seem to be saying things automatically. So where does that come from? So when we thought of the sauna, I was thinking, well, how can we, since we're embedded with these, we're impressed, embossed, branded with these kinds of icons, with semiotics with encoded meanings, maybe we can offer people a chance to roll them inside a media sauna and have these things steamed out of you. So, but temperature is media temperature. So we roll people in this cylinder, that's about the size of a coffin, and put headphones on you, and it feels open. You hear a material, what you're hearing now, similar to this, and you're there for 4 minutes or 5 minutes, but it seems like forever, but a nice kind of forever, it seems. When you look up, you see this rounded half cylinder. It's translucent plastic, diffused plastic. Outside, there's a video projector casting structured light. this one happens to be different kinds of wildly transformed images of an eclipse that our colleague Maja Kuzmanovic in Brussels made. So they're heavily layered. But the idea is that there are objects, yes, but they're not identifiable as well-defined objects. But these are meant just to tease these embedded toxic icons out of you after you've been embedded in it for a while. And of course, this is probably the most difficult space in which to give an impression of something that's immersive. Because this is a proscenium, and this is a flat image, et cetera, et cetera. The whole point of something like the sauna is that it wraps around you, but you don't feel the wrapping. Because it's translucent plastic. It's very interesting because we talk about using goggles. But because it's a translucent cylinder, it feels like you're looking into space directly. You don't actually see the surface anymore. There are 4 programs. That was just one of them. This is another. Imagine that wrapped around you. So they're quite different in character. Like shaking it out of you. Another one, done by some colleagues in Germany and Austria. Okay, so this was a test, basically. It was sort of like a study for a larger work, or actually it's an intermediate project. And the larger work is called Tea Garden. The third work of the triptych is called Tea Garden. And here I should make a decision. I can show the video from the computer, or I can show the video from the tape. Let me just run it from the computer. Interesting. I see something here, but I don't see anything there. Let's try again. Close that. Show this. Okay, that's good. Why don't I describe a little bit? The tea garden is what's being run right now as we speak in Greece. Probably, yes, right now as we speak in Greece. It's 10 hours ahead. We first did a premiere of this in SIGGRAPH in New Orleans. And the tea garden is about the following. So, well, let's just say, when you walk into the space, you encounter a set of very fantastical dresses like this, which were commissioned for this piece. You put them on, and then you realize that as you move, that you're making sounds. The first thing you notice is your body cannot move the usual way because, for example, some of them don't have sleeves, or some of them have just one sleeve, or you put them on like a tube, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is to change the relationship of the body to itself. The architecture of space is built right, is brought right to your skin now. So as you walk into the space, you're constrained in certain ways you're not used to, but then you have to learn how to walk again. You have to learn how to put on your body again. And in fact, you learn how to sound again. Because as you move, there are sensors inside this which detect your motion. There are accelerometers. And as you walk around, you're perturbing the sound field. There's a wash of sound around you. My original dream for this thing was that you walk past somebody else, the patterns on your skin will bleed off your skin and bleed onto the other body. We can't quite do that with images, but we're doing that with sound right now. As you walk into the space, there's a video that shines from a projector up above, which casts video topography around your feet. So you're walking over space which is constantly boiling underneath your feet. So I'll show you a few minutes of the space here that we did in SIGGRAPH. These are not dancers, these are just people off the street. That's a sensor in the back. So why do we do this kind of space? We're interested in how people can find consolation in the space, like this topological garden. by moving around in the field, a field of sound, or watch the sound, or watch a video, and by their own actions create objects out of the field, and then let the objects dissolve back into a field. Because underneath this, there's a kind of a critique that we're building of the combinatorial way of looking at the world. Basically, most of engineering and computer science is built along, this is very rapid, built along the notion of composability of primitive objects. And what we're about is trying to find an alternative to making sense of the world and to build complex systems, or rich systems, without complexity. And this is just the first experiment, how people can make sense of such a fluid world, a world made of continua, rather than of objects, a priori objects, and actually be able to play in such a space. So they go through a few epiphanies. The first epiphany is just learning how your own body works again. The second one seems that what people do is discover the other voice, that there are other voices, and then how to play with the other. And the third epiphany, set of epiphany, is basically learning again how to navigate in this completely fluid world, self and room. Here's an example of people, they don't necessarily know each other. They're starting to build up a language with one another without even speaking to one another. So part of our interest is how do people, let's say, coordinate activities without relying on explicit language, which is yet another kind of an explicit, discrete, symbolic representational system. And these people just have a lot of fun playing in this space. So we put the balls in there to break up the visual space, so that also to break up the body space, so you have to actually move and change your Z position. So our synthesis has more interesting data to work with. So people are just encouraged to play with themselves, to play with the actual built space around them. Good thing the curtains were 30 feet high. So the tea garden itself is an experiment. We call this a kind of a public experiment. It's a public experiment, what we call phenomenology, perception, and desire. And what we hope to do is to take what we learn from building these kinds of spaces. Well, we're learning different kinds of things. One is to learn how to work with a distributed set, a team of artists and researchers from different countries, which itself is quite interesting. It's a new model for cultural production. And the other is to basically learn how to build these kinds of things and then take them apart and put them back into the physical world, the built space, into ordinary city streets, into sidewalks, into parks, into gardens, because we're not interested in building these things as basically standalone gallery pieces in sacred spaces, but we actually are aiming toward a kind of new kind of urban design and urban architecture, which is really hybrid in a more fundamental sense, in a playful sense. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Let's do that one or this one.
Let's do this one, the better ones.
Your screen's gone off.
Light on.
It's over. Doesn't matter.
I just take them.
You could just take questions.
Okay.
We have about 10 minutes. Does anybody have any
That's
questions that they would like to ask Shen Wei? Or one that you can articulate? Yes. The filming that was, the filming that you just showed was at Seagraph in
yes, it was New Orleans, right. Right. Yes? The same video, well, this particular video isn't on the website because it's just too large. But we have images, with still images, plenty of documentation. There's a, sorry?
There's one short loop on the Sponge.
Yes. The Sponge website and the other website, the Deep Home website. This is local San Francisco, the other one's in Brussels. So go to either one. Yeah, you'll find information about it. Also about other projects that we're doing. Yes. Yes?
For the sound techniques that you use for Tea Garden, had you pre-sampled sounds and then through movement, different movements triggered different sounds, or were they spontaneously created with movement?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because remember there's this rant that we have about discrete objects. So what we're doing is we're using Super Collider, which is maybe already familiar with. The Super Collider is very interesting because it's a live sound synthesis program which allows you to basically set various parameters which change a moving sound, continuous sound. So like the granulation, the window of the granulation, things like that. And that's what we map through some other mechanisms to the user gestures. So it's not direct. We're not triggering anything. Yeah. Right, so voices come out of the field. Yes?
What do you think will be the ultimate relationship between what I perceive as either installation art or performance art and ultimately an urban environment?
Distinctions can be made in different senses, I guess.
It just seems to be, the implications are immense.
Yes.
Like a paradigm change in the way you perceive
Yes.
your own life.
Yes. Yes. I mean, there are many nice precedents, interesting precedents. So one of them that that's inspiring me for my work is the situationists. So back in the let's say from 1957 to 1972, to be precise, there was a movement, what it's sort of called the situationists, and maybe some of you have heard of them. And they were interested in making the city strange to itself. In fact, they actually had lots of battles with the architects of their time. So people like Le Corbusier built these big skyscrapers, put everything here, make a grid, and make a big highway that connects it to the workspaces, and people will be happy. And then, that didn't work out very well. What the situationists wanted to do was to walk through the city of Paris or some other cities, and as they walk, they wanted to basically look around them with strange eyes. They didn't have the technologies that we have today, but their purpose was to make the city marvelous to themselves, in such a way to do a very critical political deconstruction of the city around them. This is way before deconstructionism, though. Okay, but they wanted to make city, and they did this in a very playful way. The movement didn't succeed in a sense because it wasn't a movement. It was more a phenomenological experiment. So I think some of this work could be treated in that way. I mean, in other words, it doesn't have so much to do with the actual technologies involved, but more with the intent of the project. Now, as far as the technology is concerned, we also do have more ambitions, more than what the situationists did, because we also are talking about wrapping parts of these up and, let's say, co-bundling it with existing technologies, which we can actually deploy, et cetera, using the models that we have in Silicon Valley. So I am part of a group called G0. It's the time for a plug. There's a board called G0 in Silicon Valley, which is aimed at trying to see how art and technology can actually coexist in some very rich ways. Bo Takahara is, well, I'll give Judith the references. Bo Takahara is chairing this thing. And we just had a very large symposium with people from other states as well and from other countries, trying to see how can we address this very question that you just asked, which is, can we actually come up with new models of production of built space which feed on ideas that come from experiments like this through the design world? Yeah. Great. Questions? Yes?
And looking at the way the things that the people are wearing, the visuals are really striking. Was there some kind of, were they designed in a way to make people react in a certain way in order to generate certain kinds of sounds? Or
Yeah, yes, I understand. Another thing we talk about is this difference between designing experience and designing something below that level. So the way that we say it is that there's some industries that are very good at designing experiences, like Spielberg and Disney are great at designing experiences. They can push your buttons and know exactly how you can respond. They do pretty well for 99% of the movie audiences. Okay, so we're not interested in doing that. There are already people who do that very well. And we're interested in looking at the possibility of working with the substrate of experience. So the metaphor, the analogy, not metaphor, would be like we could work on designing a particular line of jackets, or we could work on, on making the fabric that this thing is made of. Is it fuzzy? Is it thick? Does it keep you warm? Does it rip? So we're trying to do this kind of material science at a more fundamental level of video and sound and motion and gesture and things like that. So we're looking at that kind of substance work, substrate work. So we're not trying to design, prefabricate expected reactions from the people. We're trying to look at this other level and then see how people play in the space and make gestures, make particular gestures, and make particular meanings out of those gestures. Yeah. It's a good question. Any more questions? Yes. In this last piece, for example, we actually talk to people. Of course, we talk to people as they come out, and it's easy because there are only 2 at a time. Except we're very tired because there are like 5 people running the show behind the curtains. And in Greece, it's a little bit easier. I would say about 1/3 of the people come out and they just say, "Wow, that's great," and walk away. That's it. Nobody was scared, I think. Another 1/3 of the people learn themselves. They learn basically, if I did this, I'll get something interesting. If I do this, nothing interesting happens. And this would happen about pretty soon, like halfway through. They were in there for 15 minutes. Another 1/3 really learned to play more virtuosically. They began to say, "Oh, I can do this with that part of the floor." And even if it's not true, they can read in a meaning to the room. This is really what's fun. I say, if I can chase this patch. And then I start doing, if I do this and something happens, if I don't do this, something else happens. Or I can come over to this person and I can start, remember one person going like this, and I can maybe talk with this other person by doing this, that kind of thing. So they were becoming, a little virtuosi. But that happened toward the end, usually about, 15 minutes, and then we had to tell them to leave. So that was very frustrating. But it was surprising. I mean, I didn't expect to have such a high percentage of people actually learning, which is what we were interested after such a space.
Did you make any restrictions on them, like language, were they allowed to speak with each other?
It's the other way. We would, the one instruction I would lead them into the space, or Maya, after we put them on, and we say, listen. That's what we told them. Listen, a positive thing. But listen very carefully and move slowly. Because if they move very fast, too many things are changing at once, and they don't know what they're affecting. So we just ask them to attend, and we would just, go like this ourselves, and they mimic us. That's the beginning. That brings us something else, because we have this notion of threshold performance, which is we would like to have in the next version, or maybe 2 versions out from here, we'd like to invite people who are dancers and musicians who already have a body sense. They have a set of a disciplinary practice with them. So then, if you're a violinist, you know how to do this, right? So you walk into the space, but without an instrument. You're dressed just like everybody else, but you're not identified as a performer. So just in the space. So instead of me sitting there like this in my lab coat and saying this, we just have other people who happen to be dancers and choreographers playing in that space. And we want to see how people habituate themselves into such a fluid space. Because I'm interested in seeing how people learn a real space. Because how do you learn to walk around in a real city, in a real building? You look around, you play, you go to dinner at somebody's house, right? It's that kind of history, personal and social history, that we're trying to find how to, which is what we're trying to find how to express or embed into such a, immerse into such a hybrid space. That kind of learning, yes? Yes, but without, what's interesting about this is without data. We're not making people type in the field or anything like that. It's almost sub-articulate. It's very interesting. I'm articulating now, but they're not always able to articulate. Yes.
It's almost as though your idea is to work on a code level as compared to an interface level.
Yeah.
You mentioned that's the analogy I guess I come up with, the fabric as opposed to the entire jacket.
Yes. I mean, I think there's no interface. There's no such thing as interface. And people in HCI these days are beginning to say there's no such thing as interface at all. There's not like there's a skin between me and the world. It's in fact, part of what we're doing. There is no skin like that, necessarily. Yeah. Any more questions? For now. Okay, well, I invite you to come and see this piece maybe in 2 years when we actually manage to, if we manage to bring it back to San Francisco. I thank you very much for your attention.